Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. Excited for my guest today. We have Dr. Jim Madden joining us. Dr. Jim, thanks for taking time to be here.
Sure. Jim is fine. Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk mostly philosophy of mind, but we started chatting fitness a little bit beforehand, and I know a lot of my audience is always interested in that. So maybe we'll just start a segment of like, what does the philosopher's lifting routine look like?
Sure.
Before we dive into the heavy stuff. So yeah, we'd love to hear about your fitness, athletic background. You say you compete in BJJ, but you haven't touched a barbell in 2 years. So yeah, please tell us more.
So I have been an athlete my entire life, competitive athlete my entire life. I played football through college, competed in powerlifting for a lot of years after that. And then eventually got into endurance sports. And then my oldest son wanted to try boxing for his 13th birthday. Nice. And we're generally not big on saying no. We're afraid of that, to our kids. So I said, okay, let's do it. But I couldn't find a boxing gym in the immediate area that I was willing to throw in with. But I found a judo club, right? So we, on his 13th birthday, we loaded him in the car. We did the birds and the bees talk on the way there. And then did judo. We did that for about 2 years, and that shut down. And then we one of our instructors was a jiu-jitsu guy, Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, and we got sucked into that. And that's been 4 years now that I've trained jiu-jitsu.
Nice. And
so in that I'm very pretty serious competitor in jiu-jitsu. Yeah. And then so as far as the fitness side, the lifting side, all that is, once I got into jiu-jitsu, so I worked with barbells and kettlebells, for most of my adult life. Like you, Pat, I was kind of a kettlebell OG, right? So I started with kettlebells in 2005, right?
So, wow. So you started before me. Did you do RKC back in the day?
Yeah. Back in the day.
How about that?
I used to be a regular poster on that first forum, man.
Get out. We must have, that's so crazy. We must have crossed paths at some point then. I feel.
Probably electronically. Yeah. And so I lost, okay. Pavel's entered the kettlebell, that program. That program is almost like biblical text to me, right? Okay. I lost.
It is for a lot of people. Yeah.
I lost 100 pounds in that program.
No stuff. Really? That's awesome. So
after I got done playing football, I was nearly an invalid. I had 3 stress fractures in my 5th lumbar.
Dang.
And then I kept powerlifting. That was just a bad idea, and things got bad. So I'm almost sedentary. So I got over 300 pounds. And then lost a ton of weight just doing Enter the Kettlebell for about a year. Yeah. Of course, diet is part of that too. Yeah.
It's such a good program, but one of my favorites too was his original Russian Kettlebell Challenge. Remember that one? That one's hard to get these days, but I tell people, if you can find a copy of that, snag it.
I have a cherished hard copy of that. Yeah.
Oh, you're lucky man.
In a lot of ways. So I worked with that, with Pavel stuff, and I've no offense to anyone who's done kettlebell program, right? But I've looked at other ways of programming kettlebells, and I always come back to Pavel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And right now I love Simple and Sinister, right? I love the new one. What is the
Quick and the Dead?
Quick and the Dead. Yeah. I mean, I pretty much rotate in and out with 6 weeks of that, right? With snatches. And so I worked with that stuff for a long time. Then I got into endurance work, and I discovered a brand called Tactical Barbell.
Yeah.
Okay. And K Black it's the pseudonym of the guy who writes for it, because he's still involved in a kind of a black ops profession. And I loved what he was doing. It was kind of Pavel with barbells, right? In a lot of ways. And it was smart. And I started doing it. I was corresponding with him, and he said, "You're kind of in the shape that a lot of my 25-year-old clients want to be in. Would you like to write some articles for my website?" I said, "Sure. What the heck?" Right. I'd never written about fitness. And then eventually asked me if I'd do a book for middle-aged people trying to use his system. So I wrote a book called Aegis Athlete in his system, right? And right around when I'm doing that is when I got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then all bets were off fitness-wise, because jiu-jitsu is a very jealous mistress, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so now, I really like to. I don't know if you're familiar with On It. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you mind me mentioning brands. I don't
work. No. Mention anything and everything you want, especially your own stuff. That's what.
Yeah. So the thing is, I used to think I'd have more of my own stuff, and I discovered On It. I'm like, I don't know if I have anything to add to these guys, right? Okay. So I do a lot of the programming through Onnit. They're Onnit 6 programs I absolutely
Mm-hmm.
love, right? Okay. And so I work back and forth between like Onnit stuff and Pavel stuff now.
Right.
There's another guy named Paul Rourke, okay, who's a retired Marine Corps gunny who has a book called Core Strength, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
And if you get beyond the cheesy cover, right, which is really not what the book is like, that's a very interesting book on fitness that I use that a lot too, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now I train, as far as off the mat goes, it's all kettlebells, it's steel maces, steel clubs, and calisthenics. That's all I do.
That's awesome. Well, hey, you look fantastic. You
Thank
look,
you. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, my mind is a little bit blown because this is the first time we're meeting, and I can't believe that we've been like swimming in such similar circles.
It's interesting. Yeah.
But then what connects us is philosophy of mind. It's just
Yeah,
very,
exactly.
it's just very weird, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but Dan John, who's authored books with Pavel, he's on the podcast every week. We have a weekly conversation.
Do you really? Oh man.
Yeah. Tomorrow I'll be sitting down with Dan. We have and he in fact broke the news on my podcast that him and Pavel are doing another version of Easy Strength soon. So
wow. Okay, sign me up. So I will, if you ever want to have two philosopher meatheads together, because Dan reads, right? Okay, I would love to have a conversation with Dan John. So yeah.
Yo, you are in. You know what? I'll Dan's always happy to do it. So that will be awesome. Let's it's we do it every week. So we'll just figure out a time to bring you in on one of those.
Definitely. Yeah.
So,
that
no
would
problem.
Be great. I didn't know that Dan John appeared in your show. Yeah, that's great. Dan John is like I kind of want to be him when I grow up,
Yeah, every week we have a chat just about everything and everything, mostly fitness related. And it's funny, not to get too sidetracked, but I'm having a lot of fun with this so far. And listeners can just be patient. We'll get to the philosophy of mind, don't worry. But
by the way, I don't see jiu-jitsu and philosophy of mind as entirely distinct. So
we'll make connections. I promise you, if we talk long enough, we'll make connections. So I met Dan in the early you were in the kettlebell world before I was, because I didn't get certed until 2008, maybe something like that.
Now I have no certification. I've just been reading and doing the stuff.
Yeah, but if you're on the forums, we must have crossed paths. But I met Dan because I went down to we were sponsoring a fitness conference, and I had just a little self-published book at the time, and he took it, and I was like reading Dan in high school and stuff, so it was kind of like a minor celebrity to me on like T Nation and whatnot. And I was super embarrassed. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to read this pile of junk, and he's never going to want to talk to me again. And he comes back like an hour or two later. He read it. He's like, this is great stuff. Let's go drink some whiskey. I'm like, all right. That's awesome. And we've been just good friends ever since. Yeah.
That little book he has, the Russian Hardstyle Russian Kettlebell Challenge, or what is it? It's
Hardstyle Kettlebell Challenge, HKC. Yeah.
That's a great book. And that's one of the books when people ask me, how do I get started? I say, you either do Simple and Sinister or you do that.
Right.
And they're pretty close, ideas, right? But I love that little book.
Yeah, it's awesome. This is, hey, awesome stuff. Super cool. All right, let's take a turn now. So how then, all right, let's go to your academic background, all right? Because you are a philosopher and you focus on philosophy of mind. So what are the connections there? How did you get into philosophy of mind? What intrigued you in that direction? Anything and everything you want to give historically?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I didn't, as very few people do, I didn't set off to college to study philosophy, right? I basically set off to college to play football, right? Okay. And then more or less got bounced out of the first school I went to. And then, not for academic reasons, but for other reasons. Okay. And then basically fell into 3 philosophy classes my first semester at the second school, because that's all that was open. And my advisor was a philosopher, right? Okay. So he's able to get me into 3 classes in philosophy. And I remember I came back to him 2 weeks later and said, is this your day job or do you do something else? And this is what I do. I said, I kind of want to do this. Right. And he said, well, let's wait and see. Right. Okay. But my first encounter with philosophy is when I took classes in it. Right. The first class I had in philosophy was a course on philosophy of human nature, which was basically, pretty philosophy of mind heavy class. Okay. Mm-hmm. And those issues really hit with me very hard right up front. Okay. And I thought of philosophy, like the problems that really got me into it were philosophy of mind problems. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then I go into graduate school and I'm working in Wittgenstein and Pittsburgh School, analytic philosophy, doing philosophy of mind stuff. That was for my master's at Kent State. And then I get to Purdue for my PhD. And they basically, Purdue was very good to me in many ways. And also because they were very realistic as to where they are on the food chain in terms of academic prestige, right? And they said, look, there are 2 jobs in philosophy of mind, and they'll both go to dudes from Princeton. Okay, so you need to find a way to do something that'll get your foot in the door. So I ended up writing a dissertation on Leibniz and Aquinas. Right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, on basically philosophy of science stuff and final causality and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, once I got into my job, my tenure track job here at Benedictine, then that let me kind of retool myself to do the stuff that I really wanted to do in philosophy of mind, right? And then I eventually write a book on philosophy of mind, and that's become I teach everything. It's a small school, but as far as my writing goes, right, it's mostly in philosophy of mind now. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. So let's, I'd like to start general, because we're going to have people listening to this conversation who are coming in from, maybe a lot of backgrounds who this is the first time they've ever heard philosophy of mind. But I would like to dive into some details as we move along. So maybe start in the shallow end, and then we'll get to the adult swim later on.
Jump in the shallow end of the pool. That's good.
Yeah, I like it. So for people who aren't familiar, what is philosophy of mind? What are the sorts of things that philosophers of mind think about, problems they try to solve?
Yeah. So there's, of course, like anything in philosophy, there's a lot of different angles you can come at to it. And then, and even what it is always contentious too, among the people who do it. Right. Mm-hmm. There's one way to come at it, where it's primarily a species of metaphysics, where we're asking, we're trying to solve the infamous mind body problem. Are minds material things? Are they immaterial things? And then another way that it can come up, it can just become an attempt to basically categorize, understand what the faculties of a mind are, right? And so less asking like what sort of thing a mind is ontologically. Is it a spiritual thing? Is it a material thing? And asking more, what do minds do, right? What does it mean when we say something has a mind, right? And of course, those, like how one answers those 2 different types of questions can have bearing on the other 2, right? Okay. So the former, the mind body problem, are minds material things or are they non-material things? Okay. That makes it a species of metaphysics, right? And it tends to be, I think when people think philosophy of mind on the street, that's what they think you're up to, right?
Yeah.
The latter, right, this notion of like kind of coming up with a categorization of mental faculties in an attempt to understand like what are we saying when something has a mind at all, right? That interacts more with other disciplines like cognitive science and psychology and social sciences more broadly, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say early on in my career, I was almost exclusively concerned with the metaphysical problem of the mind-body problem. And as I've matured, I've become more and more interested in the latter problem, like just what are we saying when we ascribe something with a mind? Yeah.
Right. And you have foolishly, I don't have your book in my hand. It's upstairs, but you advocate for a sort of a Thomistic view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll get into that. Mm-hmm. Do I have any? Yeah. Here's my nearest philosophy of mind book. Have you read this one by Kim? I'm sorry. This.
Oh yeah. That's like standard issue, right? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's all right, let's go into I guess what people typically think of with philosophy of mind. Is the mind a material thing? Now, I know this is sometimes hard for a Thomist to answer, right? Because we come from such sort of different perspective than so much of modern analytic philosophy. So, what do you think is the best way to begin this this conversation?
Yeah. So first of all, okay. So the sense in which I'm a Thomist is complicated. Okay, because I think the sense in which anybody's a Thomist is complicated.
Indeed.
Right. A couple of years ago, I read an interesting kind of, I think, gem in 20th century philosophy that gets overlooked. It's by a guy named Walter Kaufman. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Kaufman was the first, or one of the earliest really prominent translators of Nietzsche into English. Right. If you've read Nietzsche, you've probably read the Kaufman translations and stuff like this. And he also wrote some of his own philosophy, and he wrote a book called The Critique of Philosophy and Religion. Okay. And that book, there's some pretty standard hackneyed, Humean, atheist stuff in there. Okay. There's also some pretty profound stuff in that book. And one of the things that struck me is the section on Thomism. He points out that, most people identify themselves as Thomists, make that identification before they could have possibly really absorbed the entire corpus of Aquinas, right? Okay. So he kind of wonders, like, what kind of commitment is it when you call yourself a Thomist? Is this a philosophical commitment or is this sort of religious commitment, right? Mm-hmm. If I committed myself to this for religious reasons, or I committed myself because I'd actually like looked at the grand sweep of this thing, And so yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting, indicting question. Okay. And when I looked at myself, I'm like, my commitment to this came pretty early before I had read a whole lot of Aquinas, right? So what was going on there, right?
Now, was that for you coming from just a purely philosophical consideration, or was it with religious considerations in view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the question I wanted to sort out, right?
Yeah.
Like when I say I'm a Thomist, what kind of ist am I committing myself to there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a good religious commitment to something, right? Okay. But I thought it was an interesting indictment, a possibly indicting question,
Right.
Okay. And do I really commit myself to every square inch of Aquinas, right? Okay. And certainly there's things I don't, right? Okay. I mean, if you want to get into the astronomy, I'm not going to do that, right? Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So at some
It'd be
point,
an uphill battle on that
yeah,
one.
at some point we cross a line, right? All right. So I kind of, at that point, kind of started to really read my way back through things, and then I got back through Aristotle. Like how much have I read? Am I entitled to commit myself to Aristotle and stuff like that? So I've started kind of building from the ground back up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would say I am definitely a hylomorphist. Okay. I would say I'm definitely Roman Catholic. I think so. In some ways, that kind of makes me Thomist-ish, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But
you're flirtatious with Thomism, perhaps.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the way I think of big picture figures like Aquinas now, right? Okay. And I think of, or Aristotle or Hegel or Kant or Heidegger, these thinkers that I take seriously and have influence on me. I think of them as sort of like fellow travelers, right? Or tutors. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what am I taking? Like, what am I learning? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Less as a matter of commitment. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because just brief background. I became Catholic in large part because of Aquinas, as as a common story, right?
Yeah, I have a similar thing too.
Yeah. And but like you, I'm a little hesitant to call myself a Thomist. One is because even among Thomists, it's like, well, what kind of Thomist are you?
Yeah. And there's some good internecine struggles to be had.
Yeah, they're great. But I heard it said once, and it resonated with me, is that, a lot of people think of Aquinas as one of the first great medieval philosophers, but I forget who said this, but the way he put it is, I see Aquinas as the great last classical philosopher.
Yeah.
The sort of acme of the general Platonic project of what he called just philosophy, right? Of just any merit to that? Do you think that's maybe a fair way? Because I resonate with that. Yeah,
I think so. And actually, Charles Taylor, in his book Secular Age, what he does with Thomas in that book is interesting, right? So I think you can make a case for Aquinas being the last classical philosopher, and I think you can make a case for Thomas maybe being the first modern philosopher, right? Like, I think you have there's this transition that's going on here, right? And I would lean more towards thinking of Aquinas as the last classical philosopher, and there's an advantage with Aquinas, the guy last up to bat, right, can survey the field better than everyone else, right? So there's this advantage, right, that he's seen how stuff is played out in ways that others haven't, right? So when you're in a tradition like that, there's an advantage. Well, one, there's a disadvantage. You have to carry the baggage of the tradition, and you're constrained in certain ways. But also there's an advantage that you can see how things have played out, and what the dead ends are and things like that, right? And in Aquinas, though, there's this real difficulty that he's trying to put these disparate strands of things together, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'm not rejecting Thomas in any way, right? But I just want to always be careful now. I'm not quite sure what I would mean if I called myself a Thomist right now. Right?
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I do take a hylomorphist position, and we'll get into that, right? Okay. But one important thing for me, increasingly, anytime I talk about philosophy of mind, is I want to make sure that we are not using the words mind and soul interchangeably. Okay. I think it's very important to see that minds are not souls and souls are not minds, if what you mean by soul is anything at all like what Aristotle meant by a soul.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so I think that's important up front. Okay. So, and so kind of bear that in mind as we talk, right? So, and I think a lot of your listeners are going to probably want to conflate them, right?
That is a general default position, right?
And that's just how English works today, right?
And that's why it's hard. That's why I'm glad we're being careful, because it's kind of hard to fit the hylomorphic position into the contemporary mind-body debate.
Yeah, because it's not intended. It's not intended to make a contribution to that debate, right? Okay.
Right.
And I think, and this is one of the things I I tried to get right in my first book, and I don't think I did, right? Okay, I think I slipped too in ways I was trying not to, right? And I think everybody slips into this, is we want to make hylomorphism this player in the contemporary philosophy of mind debate, and I don't think it really is per se. I think it is a very, I think to understand hylomorphism, you have to have in mind central claims. I'm going to use Aristotle because I'm kind of working my way back, right? So central claims from Aristotle's physics, Aristotle's metaphysics, Aristotle's ethics, and De Anima on the soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have all those pieces together, I think hylomorphism falls into the kind of incoherencies that contemporary critics of it, like Bill Hasker and Kevin Cochran, raise against it. Okay. And so I think to understand hylomorphism and to see it as making a contribution to philosophy of mind, I think you have to understand it's going to come at a heavy price tag across all the philosophical disciplines, right? It's not a narrow view in the philosophy of mind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a general, I would say, metaphysic / ethic that has implications for the philosophy of mind, but it's not a philosophy of mind.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Now, maybe before we go any further, we should say what sort of hinges on these mind-body debates, right? Because there are big implications, right? So maybe you just want to tease some of those out.
So, and let me get to that by going back, because you asked like a really simple question earlier, and I gave you 15 minutes of something else. Okay,
it's beautiful though. I love it. Yeah.
So you said, you asked, what is, do I think the mind is a material entity or an immaterial entity? Okay. All right. And now that we're clear, I'm talking about minds, not souls. Okay. When you ask me, is the mind a material entity? I will say no, it is not a material entity. If you ask me, is it an immaterial entity? I will also say no. Okay. I don't see minds as things that we can identify as individuated entities. Okay. All right. I think of minds as a way of participating in a world. Okay. Not as a discrete entity. Okay. And I'll kind of give you an example, like a thought experiment to motivate that. Okay. So usually when we ask, are minds identical to our minds material entities, usually what we're asking, is, can we say a mind just is a brain, right? Okay, in a kind of flat-footed way. Maybe we can get a little better and say, is having a thought the same thing as having activity in a certain neural network?
Right. Yeah. So we'll take like functionalism or something. Whatever the mind is, it's just what the brain does, right?
Yeah. And so, and the idea then would be, and I want to be really careful because I'm playing really simplistically with how the physiology works. Okay, but let's just say having a thought about Paris in Patrick, okay, is the activation of a neural network that we'll call zeta. Okay, so it's just it's an event in the brain, we'll call it zeta. Okay. All right, and if you're going to say a mind just is a material entity, okay, you're going to basically say all the mind is that occurrence in a brain, right? Okay. And I'm happy to say that the occurrence of that event in Patrick as he's sitting in that chair right now would be enough for there to be a thought about Paris. Okay. But I don't want to say they're the very same thing. I don't even want to say that occurrence of that brain event is enough in all cases. Okay. So here's where we're going to get like weird and science fiction-y. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a bad habit of philosophers' mind, but we all do it. Okay. So let's say you've got a mad neuroscientist, right? We'll call him Michael. Okay. And Michael clones a human nervous system and grows it to maturity to, so that it's capable of having zeta. Okay. And then he stimulates the brain, right? So that it's in state zeta. Okay. So it's the zeta thing is happening in the brain. Okay. Is that a thought about Paris? Well, I think that's absurd to say that's a thought about Paris. Okay. Because that brain has never been to Paris. It's never read a book about Paris, right? It hasn't had stories told to it about Paris, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. It is in no relationship to Paris whatsoever. Do you see that? Okay. In the same way, like if a caveman by some, weird quirk got hit in the head and it caused his brain to instantiate that neural net activation before Paris ever existed in like Paleolithic history, right? It would be absurd to say that caveman is thinking about Paris. Okay. And so my point here is, to think about Paris is not to be in a discrete brain state. It's to be in a discrete brain state in a relationship to an actual city. Okay, do you see that, right? And if you think of it, okay, if I say Paris, you might think of this like lovely vacation you had with your, your fiance, back in like 2010, right? Or, you might think of war stories your great grandfather told you, all these things. Okay. And so your thought of Paris, it might be, we can identify that you're having it by that brain state. Okay. But the actual content of that thought, what that thought means, is going to involve this whole history, right? This whole history of you, this whole history of the English language, the whole history of the French language. Okay. I mean, if Charles Martel, right, doesn't win a battle, right, way back when, what we mean by Paris is very different than what we would mean by today, if there were even such a word. Do you see that? Okay. So my point is, and this is not just me, there's other people, I take an extremely externalist view about what we call mental content or mindedness, right? And that to have a thought is not to have some event go on internal to me. It's for me to be involved in a whole history of the world. Okay. And that history of the world didn't have to go that way, right? And we could have had states like Zeta, right, and not have had that history of the world, and they wouldn't be thoughts about Paris at all.
Right. So you're breaking the identity here, right?
Yeah. But also, though, I mean, and there's lots of ways philosophers mind do that. But what I'm pushing is not only to break the identity, but to see what brings about the thought is not anything just internal to me, whether it is mental or physical, okay, material, immaterial. It is my participation in this long history that comes before me.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Do you see that? Okay.
Oh, I see it. Yeah. I hope the listeners get it, because that's a good thought experiment.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. And so, to have a mind then, right, isn't to have anything going on internal to me. It's for me to be involved, right? Involved with the real world.
Right. A relationship. I like that. Yeah. This is really good. What do you think?
And also, I think if you want to get into like it's to be in a tradition. Okay.
Yeah.
Right? Do you see what I mean? Now, and if I'm not involved in traditions now, I don't have a mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super fascinating. I would like to dive into that a little bit more, but since we're already,
because I think you like draw a line of that to like Catholicism always too. So,
yeah, let's do it. I'm all for that. What do you think now? Because one of the arguments when I was first kind of diving into this, and I was one of the things that got me out of my sort of naturalistic leanings was the mind body problem, honestly.
Yeah.
And one argument that always struck me, it still strikes me, is James Ross's argument.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to throw that out there now, but we have a sort of similar issue, right? That no physical process can have any sort of formal or unambiguous content, but we obviously have this determinate, unambiguous thought content. So for Ross anyways, and I think that's right, it shows that whatever else our formal thought processes are, they cannot be identical to any physical brain state or any physical material, I think.
Yeah, right? And actually, I think I'm a huge fan of Ross's argument. Yeah, and that's a version of like an argument that like especially Thomas have made for a long time, right? But let me bookmark that, okay? Because I want to talk about because that's okay. So Ross is arguing for something much stronger than just, thoughts are not identifiably physical things. He wants to say thoughts are not identifiably physical things, and there must be some kind of like separable existence of them from physical things, right? And so far, what I've said is much weaker than that. But I want to, because you would ask, okay, so what rides on the philosophy of mind, right? Okay. And notice I haven't done any kind of like metaphysics stuff so far. It's been more the cog sci side of it. Like, what is it to have a thought? What is it to be minded? Okay. But here's the interesting thing is, if you take that route that I've taken, okay, this kind of externalist view of mind, suddenly now neuroscience is not the only story in town about what thinking is.
Right.
Do you see that? Okay. To understand our thinking then is going to require us to understand things in linguistics. It's going to require us to understand things in sociology. It's going to require us to understand things in psychology and literature and all these, and in just our personal histories and stuff like that. Okay. So what I think rides on that then, and I think what the advantage of that is, one of many advantages of the way of thinking is it loosens up space for us to talk about ourselves, right? And understand ourselves that is not limited to just the scientific method. You see what I mean? And we can say, you're not going to have thoughts without Zeta. That's fine. But you're not going to have thoughts without this broad participation, right? Of which there is no final scientific account. It's always a moving target. Like culture is always moving, always evolving, et cetera, et cetera. You see that? Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think by understanding that minds are not things that we're going to pin down internal to organisms, right? That they're going to be participations of organisms and cultures and histories, okay, then opens up this space, right, for us to do other kinds of investigation, other kinds of understanding, other, ways of thinking and talking to ourselves beside what's narrowly in the sciences.
Yeah. So we're sort of breaking out a scientism-y perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Without in any way, though, saying that there's something that the neurosciences are missing, right? Because that's not the claim, right? The claim is just what they're giving us does not amount to a thought. It amounts to a condition for a thought.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a critical distinction. So I hope people can appreciate, because we're not saying that there's no utility to neuroscience. We're not saying that at all. Like, thank God for neuroscience. Very useful. Right. But whatever it's giving us is not the complete and full story, is what we're saying. Right.
Right. Yeah. And also, I think an important thing, if you take my route, there is no complete and full story of thought, right? Because it is in many ways a cultural artifact, right? A shared cultural artifact. And your generation, our generation, we get a vote in what it is, right? What we do with the culture, right? And, right. And it's got a history that's contingent, but it's got a future that's contingent. And so, I like the way you put it, Pat. Is it Pat or Patrick? Do you prefer?
Either's fine. Pat is shorter, so if that's easier for you, save some energy.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way you put it, Pat. When you say it cuts off scientism, right? And not by saying, scientism is wrong because I have this other kind of like dualistic account that's better and preferable, and I can show you a gap in the science. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it cuts off scientism. It's just saying what having a thought is more complicated, right, than anything that we could capture in a discrete individuated occurrence in an organism.
Right. Yeah. Right. Talk to me more about the tradition aspect, because that's super fascinating.
Well, yeah. I mean, so the idea here is, okay, so if I'm not involved now, right? Okay, so how is it that I manage to talk about Paris now? I've never been to Paris. Okay.
Neither have I.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems that I can only participate in a world that involves Paris in as much as I'm taking the word of it from other people, right? I'm reading in books, I'm getting other accounts, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see that? Okay. And if you cut me off from that prior discourse about Paris, I'm no longer really able to think about Paris in any meaningful way, right? Do you see that? Okay.
Right.
And so the more now we would cut ourselves off from the past, right? The more we would cut ourselves off from these institutions that allow us to piggyback on other people, right? The fewer things we can think about, right? And we will narrow ourselves to becoming mindless, right? To the degree that we do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's a really cool insight. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah. Sorry. So anyway, Ross.
Yeah. All right. Let's head into Ross. And like we can. I did talk a little bit about Ross's argument in an episode a while back with Christopher Tomaszewski, who's doing, I know, some of his PhD work on the soul. But I just threw it out there because it was one argument that, and don't get me wrong, like some of the other classic arguments, like knowledge arguments, identity arguments, they always seemed like pretty decisive for me against the general like reductionist worldview.
Yeah.
But Ross's argument just always packed a little heftier of a punch. At least as I was studying and considering these issues.
Yeah. So, okay, here, okay. So, I'm pretty comfortable saying there's a sense in which animals have minds. Okay. Because the way I think about, ultimately, when I say someone has a mind, okay, I'm saying that we can pretty much ascribe reasons to explain their behaviors. Okay, right. So if you wouldn't ask a bucket of water why it froze, right? Okay, it's all causes, right? But we might ask Pat, why he let the bucket of water freeze, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you see that? Okay, so we're going to give reasons, explanation to your behavior, but we won't to the bucket of water, right? Okay, and now I take something like my pet chameleon, Bob. Okay, Bob, we find it irresistible to like ascribe reasons to what Bob does, right? He's in the cage, right? He's hunting, right? And you'll see him make a move, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll say, oh, he made that move because, and you'll fill it in because the cricket was over there, or something like that. It's so we think of him as having reasons for what he does. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I think McIntyre in his book Rational Dependent Animals like argues pretty brilliantly for this. Yeah.
Couldn't be more convenient.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Sitting
Exactly.
right here. Yeah, it's funny.
And he changed my view on this pretty well. Right. Okay. So I think there's a sense in which we have to say Bob's got reasons. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But notice, like Bob can't. But we don't ask Bob why he did it. Right. Do you see that? Okay. Now, if you're out hunting, Patrick's out hunting, all right, and you do something and you don't get the deer or whatever, right? You're in Wisconsin, it's good. Okay. So,
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
We ask you, why'd you do it that way? Okay. And it makes sense to us. All right. You see that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So why is it that we're not willing to ask that of the chameleon and we're willing to ask it of you? Right. Well, partly, the chameleon doesn't speak. Okay. Right. That's fine. But what does the speaking do for us? And what the speaking does for us is it lets us have a second order view of our reasons. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you see that? Like we can hold them at a distance and say, yeah, why did I do that rather than this? Okay. Mm-hmm. So we can have a distance from our reasons that say a non-human animal cannot. Okay.
Right.
And so the way I would put it is I think animals are rational in a way, not in like the real robust sense. Okay. But they're not logical. Okay. Mm-hmm. They abide by norms, right? They abide by reasons, but they don't inspect those reasons for the logical content, right? That would connect them to other things, right? And then ask themselves, is the implication of what I'm doing here, does it make sense to do it down here? Or if what I'm doing now, does it make sense with what I did in the past, right?
Right.
And it's that, and the only way we can do that is to extract that logical content, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, from it. All right. And I think this is kind of a good way of thinking of what we mean by abstraction, right? That humans have. Okay. And now note, I see it on a continuum with animal behavior, right? Animals have reasons. They operate by reasons. It only makes sense to interpret their behavior in terms of reasons. But when you get to humans, not only do we have reasons, but we ask ourselves, were those good reasons or not, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Were those reasons for which I should have acted? Or were those the reasons for which I should have concluded this? So it could be theoretical or practical, okay? Right. Mm-hmm. All right, you follow me, right?
I do.
And so now, in note, I'm still going to say that this is kind of participation with the world, right? Okay, mm-hmm. It's always a reason giving and taking with other people, things like that, okay? But I can, to borrow a phrase from a contemporary philosopher named Robert Brandom, we humans can make the conceptual content, the logical content that justifies our reasons explicit, right? We can hold them up and ask about it, right? And whereas the chameleon cannot do that, right?
Yes.
Okay, and probably no other animals do that. Now I'll say probably because I'm happy to say that's an empirical question, and if you show me other animals do that, I'll say, okay, they have rational souls and Jesus died for them too. Okay, that's
great. Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah,
I mean, try and get them to heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But empirically, it does seem to line up on what you're saying.
Lines up. Yeah, and we have been wrong about the extent of human nature in the past, right? Mm-hmm. And so let's if you tell me that dolphins are down there making their reasons explicit to each other, right? Then I will stop eating tuna, right? Okay, right.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, I'll find another protein source.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm with you. Okay. So there seems to be both a continuum but a clear break. Is that fair to say?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, so I'll circle back to the Ross style argument here. I'm going to kind of make a similar kind of argument to what Ross does. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think animals have minds, right? Okay, I think animals have souls. I think humans have minds. I think humans have souls. But also what I mean by mind is like a participation in something, right? So notice how Bob the chameleon can't make his reasons explicit, right? Okay, so who has those reasons? It's sort of like the species of chameleon has it, right? He's like sort of piggybacking on this long history of chameleonness, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and so here, for the most part, what we do, we're piggybacking on other people for what we're doing, right? But occasionally we can step back and say, yeah, but do I really want to own this thing, right? What are the reasons for this, right? Mm-hmm. What's the logical content here? And I'm going to abstract from it, okay? Right. So we mostly piggyback on a world and our species, right? But then we can step back and ask tough questions about it, okay?
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would say, chameleons participate in a mind and they have souls. Humans participate in mind and have souls. And I would say plants, for instance, okay, have souls, but they don't participate in mind.
But yeah, without the mind. Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mind. Although if you want to start saying, I can maybe assign reasons to plants, but but pretty much we have less tendency to assign a psychological state there. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So what do I mean by a soul then? All right. Okay. What I mean by a soul, right? And just straight from Aristotle, the first actuality of a living body. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Which, I mean, it would be almost meaningless to everybody. Okay. So what does Aristotle mean by that? Well, he there's this famous example he uses to explain what he means, where he contrasts what he calls eye jelly to an eye. Okay. And what he means by eye jelly is literally like they've been in battle and they know if you like crush an eye, like goo comes out. Like, so it's literally if you crush an eye, will be left over. Right. And Aristotle will say, yeah, there's a potential that goo, the eye jelly has to be an eye. Okay. But it's not actually that. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you've got an eye. Okay. And it's actually that. So what's the difference between the eye jelly and the eye? Right. And he says, well, it's sight. Okay. It's sight. All right. And what does he mean by sight? He doesn't mean actually seeing something, because closed eyes are still eyes. Okay. It's having at the ready a disposition that as soon as the conditions arise, the eye would see.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you see that? Whereas the eye jelly, it could see, but in this broader sense, like you'd have to change it and work it up before it could see again. Right. Okay. Whereas the eye in your eye socket right now, if you close your eyes, it's still an eye, because right now it's wound up like a spring. It's ready to do the eye thing. It's ready to do something. Okay. And he calls that, like he says, if eyes were living things on their own, and they're not, he said that would be their soul. It would be sight. It'd be a readiness to do this.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so then what is the soul of the chameleon? Right? Or what's the soul of the plant? Well, it's what separates the pine tree from the pile of wood chips, right? And what is that? It's a readiness to do what trees do. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's this disposition, right? Okay. What is the soul of a chameleon? It's the readiness, right, to do the things that chameleons do. What is the soul of a human? It's the readiness to do what humans do. Okay?
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in the chameleon, part of what a chameleon has to be ready to do in order to be a chameleon is to develop a certain kind of mind, right? It's to learn its way around its environment, right? Okay. What it is to be a human is to be disposed, ready to develop a certain kind of mind.
Right.
Okay. Do you see that? That's why I would say, I think you existed before your mind did. Right. So like as soon as you're a human organism, like you're wound up, ready to go to do the human thing. Right. But you're not actually going to do it until certain conditions are met throughout your natural history.
Right. So yeah, I'm actually a human organism. I think we both argue, like at conception with certain potentials. Yeah. I'm not potentially a human organism.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I am, right?
Yeah. But that's not to say you had a mind then, because like, what is the human soul? It's a disposition to develop a mind, right, that can engage in this sort of second order reflection on its behavior.
Right.
Okay. What is a chameleon's soul? It's a disposition to develop a chameleon mind that would allow it to maneuver its environment and like make more chameleons and stuff like that. Do you see that?
Good
okay.
Stuff.
And so I think this one, I think for like ethical reasons, it's very important to distinguish minds from souls. Okay. So
I'm glad we're doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, probably like for human males, they get a mind at about 26, right?
Later for me.
Yeah. Later. Yeah.
Still working on it actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, like literally you in the sense that I'm using the word mind, you probably did not have one till, you were at least linguistic. Okay?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But you had a human soul because there was a difference between you and human jelly, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. In the same way that, Bob had a chameleon mind before he could hunt on his own or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because he was different from chameleon jelly. Right. You see that. Okay. So right now, so I'm trying to kind of like motivate first the soul mind relationship there. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Now, and so what I see a soul is in the human being is this lifelong tendency to achieve mind. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. But I also say the same thing with chameleon, right? And I would even say for a plant, it's this lifelong tendency to achieve what it is distinctive about being that kind of plant. Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. So once again, I don't see the soul as like an extra BB in your pocket. Like I don't see it as right?
I just saw, it's so funny you brought this up. I just saw that it's a Disney or Pixar movie or something coming out. Did you see the trailer for this? It's called Soul. And of course, it's like totally Cartesian, right?
Yeah, totally Cartesian. Yeah.
And it's just like this is like I might get the premise wrong, but it looked like little jellies hopping around, right? Like Men in Black style. Like the soul is just something that occupies the pineal gland or whatever, right? And like that is absolutely not the way we're approaching this. And I think we would argue that's absolutely not the way to think about the soul, right?
Not at all. And I think, I mean, maybe that's, you know, that's how some people think about minds. I don't, by the way, right?
Yeah.
But by soul, I mean, what is it about that thing that makes us identify it as an organism and not, you know, something rotting?
Right. Yeah. Well, is it a sort of principle of organization? Would that be another fair way to phrase it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a contemporary philosopher by the name of Mark Johnston, right? Whom I admire quite a bit, is at Princeton. And the way he argues, he says the soul or the form of a thing, right, is what answers to its definition. Okay. And it's a very Aristotelian way to put it. Okay. So, you know, you could take poor Bob and run him through a wood chipper and you'd have all the jelly left, right? Okay. But that wouldn't answer to the definition of chameleon, right? If you were, but prior to the wood chipper, it answers it. Well, what makes it definably a chameleon at that point? It's this tendency to undergo a certain course of changes, a pattern of development as a chameleon. Right. Okay. Well, by the same token, if I get run through a wood chipper, right? Okay. You'll have the
philosophers always like the non-gruesome examples, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I guess it gets the students' attention, right? And so you'd have that 180 pounds, right, of meat left over, but it wouldn't be definably human, right? And in fact, it's like a wolf comes by and eats it, it's going to become a wolf, right? So what's the difference between the meat on the far side of the wood chipper and Jim right now? Well, it's that Jim's been on a developmental course for the last 47 years that is definably human. Right. Right. Does that make sense?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's good.
And that's what Aristotle means by the soul of the thing, right? Is it has that readiness to constantly keep reaching out and doing the thing that defines it as that kind. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I know, especially in the Catholic world, people like want to resist that because like we've drunk the Cartesian Kool-Aid, right?
Big time.
Yeah, big time. Okay. And this is why I've always said, you know, you could prove to me that materialism was true. Okay. But it wouldn't change like my views about abortion.
Right.
Okay, because for me, like the question is whether or not it's a human organism. Okay. And actually you could prove to me materialism is true. And I would still say the thing has a human soul. Okay, because what a human soul is a disposition to live a certain kind of life, right?
Exactly.
Okay, you know what I mean? And to fulfill that. Do you see that? And as soon as you have an organism up and running, it's one of those.
Exactly. Yeah. This will tie in nicely. I was just chatting with Dr. Gavin Kerr about similar life issues and stuff like that.
That dude is smart. I admire him quite a bit.
Dude, let's do a round table with him.
He was on another podcast I was on. I was like, you guys need to like hook us up. So, and he's a jujitsu MMA guy too. So
he's actually training Kung Fu right now. Yeah, so Gavin will give him a shot.
He's had some MMA fights, I think.
He's has he? I don't know. We'll have to ask him about that. We'll get him on. I bug him to come on usually at least once a month.
I won a world championship in jiu-jitsu, but I have no desire to do MMA.
Dude, that's awesome. That's so cool.
But anyway, okay, so let me kind of wind back to the Ross kind of considerations. Okay, and I'm doing something a little different than Ross here. Okay, so
no, this is good. No, I want your contribution specifically. I can do a separate episode by reading Ross's essays.
Yeah, sure, certainly. And I'd say this that book, Hidden Necessities, that's a hammer blow good book. Yeah.
It is good. It's technical. So for beginners, that's not probably where you want to start, but it is an awesome book.
Right. But anyway, and so I'm kind of build a story for you here of like continuity between the plant, the non-human animal and the human, right? Okay. You can see, okay, we have a common story about soul and what it is and its disposition towards the good of that thing. Okay. But now you get the human where, you know, we have reasons like the chameleon has reasons. Okay. But that we can do this other thing. We can sit back and look at them in terms of their specific logical content, right? Okay. And it's not exactly how Aristotle argues for it, but it'll get us to much the same place. Okay. And if you think of it though, if it's say, in my inspection of my reasons, right, I understand that I was operating by a certain logical law. Okay. So, you know, modus ponens, which, you know, is if P is true, then Q is true. P is true, therefore Q is true.
Right.
Okay. It's got to be. Can't change. Right. Ross puts it, it's absolutely determinate under all instantiations, right? It's indifferent. Like, however, you could write it in French, you could write it in English, you could write it in any number of logical notations. You could represent it with piles of sticks, right? Okay. In whatever way it's instantiated, it still expresses that same logical relationship of sufficient condition.
There's a definite content.
There's a definite content. Yeah. And what's important for me is that content is unvarying. It does not vary. The content is not subject to change. Okay. And by the way, that is, if you asked a Greek, okay, what do you mean by immaterial, right? A Greek would tell you something that doesn't move, okay, which means it doesn't change, right? So very often when we talk about is the mind immaterial, is the soul immaterial, and what we mean is the same. So like contemporary philosophers by material, immaterial, it sort of means like there's like spatial properties and there's non-spatial properties, right? Okay. And what the hell anybody means by a non-spatial property, I would love to hear that. Okay.
Okay. Chime in. Yeah,
chime in, right? Okay. But like for the Greeks, when they say it's immaterial, they mean it doesn't change. It's immortal. Okay. It's eternal in that sense. Okay. And so for Aristotle, like when we are able to think about our thinking, okay, what are we doing? We're bringing up logical content. We're bringing up necessities. We're bringing up essences that are unvarying, unchanging. Okay. Well, it would then seem that we then, as a human organism at that point, are participating in something unchanging, immobile, right? And the way Aristotle defines God is nous thinking nous. It's thought thinking about itself. It's self-aware of reasons. You
right.
see that? Okay.
Whereas Lonergan puts it, an unrestricted act of understanding itself. Isn't that a nice mouthful,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. It's about as clear as Aristotle, right? Okay, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And so here's what I'm getting at is when we do that thing and we sit back, how good are our reasons? And we get to the actual essence of the reasons. We get to the unchanging content of the reasons. On the Aristotelian view, that is the human participation in divinity, okay, which is immortality. Right? It's not moving. It's not changing. And in as much as we are reflective on our reasons, we are participating in divinity, and therefore we are participating in a kind of immortality.
Right.
You see that? Okay. Now, how we make sense of that in terms of individual immortality, because like if you're thinking about modus ponens, I'm thinking about modus ponens, then we're both like kind of identical to God and then identical to each other, and okay, and all that. Okay. But I think the point here though is to see what the really classical Aristotelian argument for separability of soul is it's that notion that human thought is itself a participation in divinity. Okay. And that's why Aristotle sees contemplation, right? That kind of ultimate second order reflection on our thinking and the essences of things. That's the goal of life.
It's the noblest thing, right?
It's the noblest thing. It is happiness. It is, and if the Greeks have the notion of salvation, it's that. Right. Okay. Do you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately what you get in like Ross and like, I've made these arguments in other places. They're all versions of trying to state in less spooky, less poetic ways what Aristotle left there.
Right. Yeah.
But the older I get, the less I really care about that. I'm like, let's get on with the poetic and spooky, right?
Because I agree. Like having the precision is good to, I think, at first convince you, but I'm with you. There's just something about going back to crusty old Aristotle himself. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah. And so, I mean, I think of myself as a recovering analytic philosopher. Okay. And so, Plato famously, you had to study geometry for like 10 years or 15 years before you could join the academy. Right.
Right.
But, Aristotle, there's an interesting moment in Plato's Republic where he refers to his students as your 30-year-olds. The idea that you would teach it to somebody who wasn't in his 30s was just absurd. Right. Yeah. Okay. And Aristotle too, like he says in Nicomachean Ethics, like, I wouldn't even attempt to teach this to young people. Right. Okay. And, so I think we need, it's using the Platonic case, this like very rigorous, precise study to develop a bullshit detector.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
But you can't like build a life on detecting bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. At some point you've got, you've had the head, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
But you have to at some point make a claim. Right. And the point of that claim is not to please everybody. It's not to get everybody to agree. It's to get at what is the truth, right? Yeah. And it might be that what can be stated as the truth cannot be stated in nice, neat terms that would please a geometer or an analytic philosopher.
Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I love the idea of developing. Hemingway's got a good line: developing a shock-proof bullshit detector.
Oh,
right?
I like that. Really, I didn't know Hemingway said that. Yeah,
Yeah,
my advisor as an undergrad used to advise me to develop a bullshit detector.
Yeah, well, I think, just generally speaking, people ask, well, what's the value of philosophy? What's the value of logic? I'm saying at nothing else, you'll be less susceptible to bullshit, if nothing else, right? And that's pretty valuable in today's world. As far as
it'll sharpen the knife.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe then with Ross, part of the other kind of key, I think, aspect to part of his argument is that we clearly have this unambiguous thought content, right? So like we know what we mean when we say we're reasoning by certain by modus ponens or modus tollens or whatever. And to even deny that, to say that we don't know what we mean, assumes that we do know what we mean, right? Because we're comparing it to the thing. So like you can't even escape it, right? Like you can't even get around this. And then he just says, the problem, however, is it's always going to be ambiguous with any physical thing, right? So what's one of the examples that Phaser gave an updated article of it where he says, if you just draw a triangle on the board, right? What does that mean? Well, there's many different ways that we can think about that triangle, many different interpretations we could give, right?
Is that there's some great evidence on. So like, okay, if I always try to do it, but I can't do it because I'm slow. Right? You draw a cube on the board, right? Okay, you have to train a child to see that as a cube. It's ambiguous, right? And this is a famous example from Wittgenstein, or like the duck rabbit from Wittgenstein. Like you can draw this kind of duck rabbity thing. Is it a duck or is it a rabbit? Right? You have to train somebody to see that. Okay, and even a triangle, right? Without a background, we were already used to seeing two-dimensional things on a board, interpreting them in certain ways, et cetera, right? You would not see it as a triangle, right? So there's all material instantiations are ambiguous in terms of their meaning, right? They all are, okay? But the problem is it seems that like the laws of logic are not ambiguous, right? So you cannot identify them with any material instantiation.
And that would include brain states. Is kind of where we're getting at against functionalism or something like that, right? Yeah.
And so I mean, so you can't like clearly other brain states. No one's going to say that you have to be in zeta to have a thought about Paris. No one's going to say you have to be in omega to have a thought about modus ponens. Do you see that? Because it seems like perfect reasonably you could have other organisms that would do this who don't have those states, right?
Right.
That are wired differently. Okay.
Yeah, just thoughts about extraterrestrial life.
Or if you want to go the functionalist route and bring in machines, fine. But what you've just said though is the material instantiation doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think this is why people like Ross's argument so well. And he says this in the chapter. There was a paper first, but in that chapter, he says it. He says, look, and I'm going to use like a lot of the darling positions, I think it's how he puts it, right, of 20th century analytic philosophy, right? Like things like functionalism to say, look, that actually supports what I'm up to here. The fact that the same thought can be instantiated in different configurations tells us we can't identify it with a configuration at all.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
The way I just put it, something I wrote just the other day is the no material thing is indifferent to its material instantiation. It just is its material instantiation, right? So if you have something that is indifferent to its material instantiation, then it's not a material thing. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I like you brought up the computers, which again is often used to support functionalism, but I think Ross shows, and as you're showing, like what the problem with that is. David Bentley Hart's got a good line on that. I'm going to butcher it, but he describes it as a sort of episode of collective amnesia where we first impose the analogy of minds on computers when we design computers. We forget that we impose that analogy and then reimpose it on us and call ourselves computers, right? I'm like, that's a beautiful summary of the issue, right?
Okay. I've actually in my book I did, and I would stand behind these arguments still. A fairly standard, anti-AI argument in there, like drawing from people like Searle, Chinese Room, and like kind of the sort of thing you're getting going on in Bentley Hart, right?
Yeah.
Since though, I don't think there's anything wrong with those arguments, but since I've kind of come to think there's a more profound thing going on that we should point out in our rejections of artificial intelligence. Okay?
Yeah, let's hear it if you don't mind.
So, so first of all, something could be rational without being rational the way we are. Okay, do you see that? Right. Okay. Like Wittgenstein famously has a line where, how's he put it? He says, um, how's he put it? He says you might be able to show him that a machine was thinking, okay, but he says uh, it wouldn't be our thinking, okay, because our thinking is built on a way of life, okay. Or my favorite way this has been put, there's a guy named, but recently, like prematurely died. He's a philosopher at the University of Chicago named John Haugland, right? Whom I admire a great deal. A lot of stuff I'm doing is just kind of pulling Haugland into like the Thomistic world, okay. He said the problem with computers is that they don't give a damn. Okay. And what he meant by that is, okay, so right now in your room, right, if I asked you to count the objects, right, you count the guitar, right, you count the headphones, you count the chair you're sitting on, et cetera, okay. And you and I would not see anything odd about that, right? But you could have counted the colors in the room, right? Okay. You could have counted the microorganisms in the room, right? You could have counted, the quarks and the electrons in the room. Good luck, right? Okay, all that stuff. Okay. And so the point is like, if anytime you say, I ask you to count the objects in a room, I'm assuming that you and I have a background agreement about what's relevant to the conversation. Do you see that? Okay. And if I said, yeah, hey, let's say we're getting ready to load a moving truck, and I say, how many things are in that room? And you come back and say, well, a billion. What do you mean a billion? Well, I counted all the molecules or something like that. I'd be like, well, that's not relevant. That's not what we're doing. I don't care about that right now. Do you see that? Okay. And the idea is that for human beings, it's not just that we can make true statements. It's that in any situation, we can make infinitely many true statements. Okay. And we have to sort that in terms of what we actually care about up front. Okay. That there's a concern for things up front. Okay. And the way Haugland argues, he said, well, ultimately too, is that concern is going to fall into these sort of existential considerations ultimately, right? Okay. Like you walk around in a world where you could notice all sorts of things, right? And a lot of them you're leaving behind, a lot of them are relevant to your thinking. Okay. Are you a married man, Pat?
I am, and 4 kids.
Yeah. So I bet you a big, huge, if you're sorting what makes a world come to be for you is your wife and kids.
Oh yeah.
And your concern, your commitment to that. Do you see that? Okay. And certainly for me, right? You see, okay. And so what Haugland is saying with this sort of thing is what human thinking is not just any sorting of the world. It's a sorting of a world based on something we give a damn about, that we're concerned about things, right? That we want certain things like love and truth and being and things like that. And that's what distinguishes us from machines. It's not just that we can sort a world, right? It's not just we can operate by concepts. It's that we care, that we have concerns.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I was just watched the new Terminator movie, which was pretty bad. And not like we're trying to get philosophy of mind lessons from Hollywood, but there was a line in there where she asked the Schwarzenegger cameo, right? Do you love? And he says, not like humans, not like humans. I'm like, okay, well, you just got one thing right.
And man, I have the book in front of me. I don't have it here, but at the end of one of Haugland's most brilliant papers, he says, that AI and cognitive science are going to get anywhere until they're able to accommodate the role love plays in sorting our world for us.
Yeah. I love this idea of a sorting and sort of caring argument. I mean, I'm with you. I think all the other, arguments we're discussing are pretty decisive of why against AI. But these extra considerations are very interesting as well.
Yeah. Or another example that Haugland uses is Deep Blue can beat the greatest human chess master in chess now. Okay, but Haugland would say, but the machine is neither proud nor humiliated by what happens, right? Because it doesn't care. It's not capable of care, right?
Right. Yeah.
And like to kind of like put some meat in the bones with it is this is something like he's taking from Heidegger. Haugland's taking from Heidegger. If I'm walking home, from the office and I'm kind of scared for some reason, right? I'm in like a fearful mood. I'm going to notice the rustle of the leaves I wouldn't have otherwise noticed, right? I'm going to notice like, what's that guy across the street doing? Right. You know, or, you know, I'm going to notice the, you know, the bats flapping, whatever it is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's the mood, right? Okay. That reveals to me these things in my environment that I would have otherwise noticed. It's that emotion that I bring to it. Okay.
Yeah.
It's my mood. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, like that mood though, that is built on a concern for my well-being, a concern for my life, and probably a concern that I want to get home and to see my wife and make, you know, all these things. And to say that you're capturing that just by a function, right, misses the whole point, because we sort primarily through these kind of emotional commitments.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. That's
Yeah.
really good. I'm gonna have to read what's the philosopher's name one more time. I haven't heard
John
of him.
Hogland.
John Hogland. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check out some of his work.
And really what Hogland's doing is he's kind of translating Heideggerian phenomenology into you know, the conversation in the contemporary philosophy of mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super fascinating. Okay. So this is, and just to be, you know, like we could have gone through all the different accounts of physicalism and reductive, non-reductive, but I think, certainly I think if the arguments that we've been just sort of teasing out here go through it, it sort of kind of takes care of all of those, right? That's why I wanted to focus on functionalism, because I think functionalism is, if I'm being honest, I still think it's ridiculous, but I think it's the most plausible of the physicalist, I guess, accounts, right?
Yeah.
So then for the hylomorphic account, then what's the because like we said at the beginning of this conversation, it doesn't fit well into the contemporary conversation. You know what, let me actually ask you this, because this came up in my conversation with Christopher Tomaszewski, and we actually kind of disagreed on it, and it was interesting because I brought up near-death experiences, which is kind of an interesting. Have you looked into the research around those much?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I don't think they show much. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. He wasn't very much on board with them either.
Yeah. Partly because, you know, I mean, this could be like a priori commitments I have. Like, I'm not really big on disembodied consciousness, right? Okay, because I think
neither was he. But
it's an involvement in a world, right? Okay. Now, and also I think rationality doesn't necessarily have to be consciousness in that sense, right? Because like it doesn't have to be qualitative, right?
Right. Right.
Now, but here's the deal. Now, there are some tough cases, right, to explain.
I think very tough.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but anytime you're going with that kind of in empirical evidence, right, you've got to kind of like, okay, yeah, all bodies empirical evidence, right, that aren't just flat common sense, right, have some counterexamples. You know what I mean? So you've got to kind of like weigh that. Do you see what I mean? Right. And so, yeah, I don't think they show anything decisive, because like the number of cases that we're looking at here, right, are pretty small. And you get into some of the literature. I haven't gotten terribly deep in this, but I have looked at some of it, right?
Right.
It's not like these were controlled studies or something, right? You know what I mean? It's always like reports after the fact, right? And what we know about, like, from the social psychology of memory and stuff like that, that's really complicated stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think one of the problems with these in general is there's this ambiguity, not in all the cases, but in some of the cases, between when I remember something happening and when it happened, and when the memory occurred. Did you see that?
Yeah.
So like I could like have, so for instance, you have a dream, right? And you wake up and the dream has temporal duration to it, right? Like what you remember about it. It was like, you know, I went through my whole day. Okay, well, did the dream unfold over 2 hours while you were having it, or did you just wake up with a memory of 2 hours?
Yeah, right.
Okay, you see what I mean? And I think if we take that ambiguity, I think that's something we'd have to really tease out to see with a lot of these cases. Are these experiences that, you know, simply I woke up with remembering something over a duration, or I'm actually having experiences that had a duration over the whole time I was supposedly brain dead?
I get you. Okay. Yeah, so Chris was he's in line with what you're saying, because he's kind of a Thomistic corruptionist, right? So he thinks that your soul survives, but you don't when you die, right?
That's I mean, if you're gonna like peg me into like that, like getting to that level of nitty gritty, right, which I try to resist, but because I think a lot of times when we start talking about like disembodied existence, all that, I don't know if we have any clue what the hell we're talking about anymore, right?
Oh, amen. Yeah.
But if you push me to there, yeah, I would be a corruptionist. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't have to spend too much time on it. The thing with me though is when I was kind of looking at this from the outside, especially before I made any religious commitments, is I was struck by the hard cases. I still am, honestly. Like you
Yeah,
look
no,
at like
they are striking. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie.
the Lancet study. So now I've been beginning to think like, okay, well, how could it be reconciled? Would it just be like on the order of miracle? That's kind of how I'm thinking of maybe these would be, right? Of order of like God specifically wanting to show somebody something, but this probably isn't the normal. I don't know. That's kind of how I've been thinking about it, I guess.
Yeah, but it could be at the order of miracle, but you still have that same ambiguity that I'm bringing up here, right? You know, is it just you this memory was implanted upon your awaking, or were you actually conscious throughout this process?
Yeah, yeah. Right? So yeah, that's
and one of the problems I think with all of these though is they assume our standard story about how the brain works is right. You know what I mean? It assumes that there's no mental activity if there's detectable like brain waves, right?
Right. Yeah. So because they're saying, you know, you're looking like at flat EEGs and fixed dilated pupils.
But that could just be a question of our instrumentation,
right?
Not whether there's actual neurological activity.
Right. Yeah. The thing that gets me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, are not just the fact that people have experiences with no detectable or very little detectable, you know, brain activity.
Yeah.
But the thing that really shook me were the veridical experiences. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So
those are the ones like, damn, that's hard. That is hard to explain away for sure. You know,
I mean, what's the one I read about? Like some kid, I think it was a kid, you know, came back from supposedly being dead, and he was aware of a pair of shoes in the roof of the hospital. And
there's a lot of cases like that, right? That get this independent verification of stuff, and it's like, okay, so you can't really just. It'd be weird if somebody was even having an illusion or a hallucination at some point, but once you start bringing in those. So I don't know. I haven't tried to provide like a fully reconciled account, but it's funny when I talk to my other Thomist friends is they seem to be much more skeptical of the NDEs than other dualists are, if that makes sense. But you can appreciate why for the reasons.
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah. And I think there's always a weighing you got to do here. Like, okay, so what's the likelihood that there was some kind of suggestion subconsciously, even that the people asking the kid the questions put out, right? Okay. Or that the kid just got lucky, right? That he had a delusion about shoes in the roof and it turns out they were there. That could, I mean, unlikely that could happen, right?
Right.
You got to weigh that against the likelihood that there are actual disembodied experiences. And that's going to be very difficult to assign a probability.
Yeah.
To the likelihood, you know what I mean? And so like, I get this on like arguments of resurrection and stuff like that. Like I'm like, I don't really know. I don't see a lot of like rational weight to these things because one of the sides of the weighing I have to do, I don't know how to assign an antecedent probability to that.
Oh yeah, I know. Like Swinburne puts it like at 99.6% probability that the resurrection happened. I'm like, how are you coming up with these probabilities? Honestly,
yeah, exactly. And so how am I going to assign a probability, non-question begging probability that there are of the claim that there could be disembodied experiences, right? I'm going to say that approach is zero. Okay. Right? Okay. Others, okay, you would say, no, it doesn't approach zero. It's going to approach 9, Jim. What are you talking about? Right? You know what I mean? So I don't know a non-question begging way to assign that probability. And, you know, against this low probability of maybe the kid had been, you know, suggested to, or just got lucky or something like that. You know? That's why I find these kinds of debates, I don't know. How
you know, I'm with you. And the one thing that I always tell people is like, look, all the NDEs could turn out to be completely false, and it wouldn't change my mind on anything that we've been discussing at this point, right? Yeah.
No, yeah, and I think that's one of the things too in all this stuff. Gosh, we're just so worried about apologetics all the time, right? Okay, like, you know, I've got to like win this thing, right? Do you know what I mean? Or like, I need this argument to convince somebody or something.
Oh yeah,
or
absolutely.
If I don't have this argument, I'm gonna fall off the wagon and not be a Catholic anymore, something like that. Well, if that's the case, then you've got deeper problems.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, I find the NDE question interesting, not because I don't think anything rides on it at all. Okay. Right. I find it a fascinating question, right? You know, I think you're wrong, but I find it fascinating, right? You know, it's like, well, yeah. And that's one of the things is I kind of worry about, you know, in a lot of the, be careful, because I mean, I think people do great work. Okay. Right. Okay. But in a lot of the more like kind of popular Catholic world, everything's apologetic and it's not contemplative, right?
Oh, 100%. You're spot on. Yeah, you are.
And you know, I teach, Benedictine, we are blessed with like very, very, you know, for the most part, like interested, you know, young Catholic people, but the extent most of them of their interest in ideas is just simply like Facebook apologetics, right?
Yep.
Right. And I'm like, I don't care how it plays on Facebook. I just want to wonder about that.
I just want to know what's true. And on a deepest level, I talk to people about this too, because, you know, I get a lot of messages, especially from like young guys in the existential crisis. And they're like, Pat, I don't know how to answer this argument. I'm like, because you're not a metaphysician.
Yeah.
You got to go be a like, if you want to get in the game and you want to like, you got to go, maybe this way of saying, like, if you're going to enter a little, you got to go all the way, right? You can't don't just stay on popular level apologetics, because then you're always going to be ducking out to somebody else to do your work for you. And you have to decide if you're just going to roll up your sleeves and say, I really, and you have to do it because you want to know what's true, not because you just want to win an argument. And that, I think, is its own reward. I really do.
Yes.
And, you know, I sort of, since I converted and I've been producing Catholic content, people have called me an apologist, but I really resist the term. I really don't like, and I mean, like, it's not meant to, like, people get the word wrong. We're not apologizing, saying sorry for something. An apologist is somebody who just gives a defense for, so we're all apologists in some sense, right? But it's because I share your concern, Jim, of like the popular level apologetics, where people are always just, more focused superficially on winning arguments or whatever, rather than really trying to seek that true contemplative life of figuring out. And I figure, like, once you do that, all the kind of superficial concerns, like, they're just not concerns, like, especially the contemporary debates around like free will and stuff. I think they're just so utterly confused, right? But if I think if you've rolled up your sleeves and you worked out all these positions, you're like, you're just not, they don't bother you. You know what I mean? It's just like,
well, and I mean, this could, could be just maturity too. I'm perfectly happy to say I don't know. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, just using an example of, say, so I just gave this argument earlier of like why I think, our thinking is a kind of participation, is it participation in divinity? Okay. And it would seem some sense that our thinking is separable from us, but I have no really idea how to like really make sense of that in terms of survival and things like that. You know what I mean?
Oh,
but
yeah.
At a certain level, I'm not sure how much I care, right? The idea, like, that's a pretty good result, right? You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that we're really afraid to admit is that our faith is indeed a faith.
Right.
Okay. Do you see what I mean? Okay. Right. And I think that's an important step to get to, right? And I think a lot of times, like, I'll have young people come to me and they want me to give them like lockdown proofs of things that I take de fide, right? Like, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't have a proof of that, if that's what you're looking for, right? You know what I mean? A lot of those I just find myself thrown into, right?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I had to, like, I got my head into the Catholic Church before I got my soul into it, if that makes sense, right? Like, I had to make that prayer. And once I did, that just changed everything for me. And so, like, one of my prayers every day for me and my family is, God, keep giving me the gift of faith. Like, we forget that this is a supernatural virtue, right?
Yeah. Like, what's in the Gospels, a moment with the beggar, help me believe, right?
Yeah. And if you're an agnostic, pray the agnostic's prayer. God, if there is a God, help save my soul if I have one, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. And so a lot of times too, I think what happens in these, and once again, I really don't like doing, armchair sociology on people that are like well-intentioned, right? Okay. But I think a lot of times what people want is, they're like, okay, they're aware of all these like secular smart people out there, right? And they just want their own smart people to identify with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, you've got your smart guy and you can appeal to that smart guy for authority. Now I need a smart guy I can appeal to, right? And I'll offload the responsibility for what I believe to that person. Do you know what I mean? And I think we all offload responsibility for our beliefs at some level, right? Like, I'm doing that right now for chemistry, right? Okay, do you know what I mean? But I think, the degree to which we offload as little as possible, the more contemplative we are and the more participant we are in the life of the divine, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Hey, Dr. Jim, this has been an absolutely fascinating, enthralling conversation. Do you have any sort of summary thoughts here of everything we've discussed? Obviously, I'm going to bug you to come back on here again.
Yeah, no, this should be fun. This is really fun. Yeah, no, I guess, my summary is, don't confuse minds with souls, right? Right. Remember that your mind isn't your own, right? You share it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that is a very important thing to understand, because it is those shared traditions of mind, right, that we have to preserve so that we can continue to be rational. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, before we say goodbye
Mhm.
on the recording here, where
Yeah.
can people keep up with your work? Do you mind just mentioning any of the publications you have out so people can pick them up,
Yeah. So, okay. So, I
including the
have,
fitness book again,
yeah.
by the
Okay.
way.
So
Yeah.
I have a book, Mind, Matter, and Nature,
Mhm.
a Thomistic Proposal for Philosophy of Mind, that came out from COA Press in 2013. Okay. You can find that anywhere. There's Ageless Athlete, which is my workout book. You can find that on Amazon, right? Uh, and in terms of just like more recent work, I do a lot of lectures for the Thomistic Institute, which is run through the Dominicans on the East Coast, and you can find, I have a lot of lectures up on their SoundCloud. I think they're on Spotify too.
Yeah.
So most of the stuff we talked about, you can find lectures by me on their SoundCloud or Spotify. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'll link a
Yeah. I
couple
don't
of
do a
the.
lot of social media. So yeah.
That's all right. That's probably
Yeah.
for the best. So I'll
Yeah.
link the TI lectures in the show notes.
Yeah.
Apparently, one of my children got out of their cages upstairs.
Yeah. I understand. I had to come to the office. So yeah.
Yeah. We'll put your books in there, and yeah, Dr. Jim, this has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, it's great. Thank you, Pat.